My name is Raymond. I'm an architect.
This Lifetime Achievement Award goes to a man who has made an extraordinary contribution to the world of architecture. Raymond Moriyama.
Whatever I do as a person, as an architect, it's not so that it looks good on paper or in a magazine. And it's not a statement of one's ego.
I would like to congratulate the architect. You know, it seems to be a very good building. I'm very jealous of you.
It has to express democracy, equality, inclusion of all people, and social justice. If not, then architecture is really a hollow sham. My grandfather said, in life, you have to try your very best in everything you do to be perfect. But as a mortal human being, imperfection may be closer to man than perfection. There is magic to imperfection. It's kind of strange to say this, but by 14, I think my basic character was set. And the rest of my life was just details. But it wasn't easy.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Canada went to war claiming democracy, individual rights. But at home, it was just the opposite, almost a shambles. 22,000 Japanese Canadians were tossed into internment camp in their own country. If you were called enemy alien as a child of 12, and to be called a goddamn Jap, it will never escape you. I was born in Vancouver, BC. At age 4, apparently I was very good in making things. And I made a model airplane, and I used to wind it up and fly from the living room and make the plane land on the kitchen table. And I was very successful at it, apparently. Then Monday, I wound the plane as tight as I could and let it go. But once he got into the kitchen, it landed on top of the old-fashioned wood-burning stove. So I got the highest three-legged stool. I got on top, reached across, it tipped, and as I was coming down, it was a really boiling hot stew. And covered the back of my head and all the way down the back and arm. Guess I screamed, the mother came rushing in, and the skin was peeling and it became a really bad burn and scar. After my accident, I was in bed for 8 months. My arms wouldn't move properly, and I was really stiff as a wooden puppet. It was a total disaster. During that time, Dad put the bed by the window, so I was able to look out, and I saw this construction going on. And as a child of a little over 4, I thought there was a castle going up. And every once in a while, a man used to come onto the site, and I thought, wow, the guy's really good looking. And when he opened these rolls of drawing, all the men would smile and nod, and I thought, wow, the guy's got talent. So I asked Dad to find out what he is. Well, he's called an architect. I said immediately, I'm going to be an architect too. So at 4 and a half, my future profession was settled. God, he or she opened the door of my eyes towards architecture. My father was from Kagoshima, part of Japan. He was asked by his older brother to come to Vancouver to help run a hardware store. My mother was raised in Tokyo. She was well educated, except she was very young and she had no experience of going to a foreign country. To my mind, Vancouver, before the war, was not a very good place for Japanese Canadians. It was a hotbed for hating Asians. The Japanese community was isolated. There were real clear edges. In 1907, white Canada invaded Japantown. And they used to call it Japtown, to get rid of all the bloody Japanese. But white Canada got beaten back by the Japanese Canadians, who fought back furiously, protecting themselves against these wild accusations and invasions. And so the politicians were waiting for the right moment to strike back. And the right moment came with World War II.
Here is the motion picture record released by the United States Navy of the havoc wrought by the Japs' sneak sky and sea raid on Pearl Harbor. On December 7th, 1941, Japan struck first and declared war afterwards, immediately unifying America in its determination to fight and win the war thrust upon it.
After Pearl Harbor, it was total chaos in the Japanese Canadian community. Japanese Canadians had no rights, and they had this War Measures Act, which could do anything to anybody. Canada went to war in defense of individual rights and democracy, but at home, they were separating families and discriminating against all Japanese Canadians. My dad objected to what was happening. He told me that he's going to fight back and be counted. No, it takes a lot of guts. Well, I thought he was a great man, and I was really proud of him. So he was ready to be arrested, and the Mounties came, plain clothes. 3 of them came, and 2 of them took him away. You know, made a prisoner of war. The 3rd fellow stayed on, and he, I guess, looked upon us as really enemies, that we could do things that could damage Canada. And the last thing he said to me, pointing a finger right in my face, is that if we see you outside after sunset, you will be shot. You know, my gosh, you know, this is Canada. It was a total shock. I was 12, my sister was 10, and my youngest sister was 4. That night was a night of horror for us. You know, and of course, you know, not like in the movies, you know, the cavalry never came for the rescue. They set up an interim camp for the Japanese. We were given a horse stall with 2 narrow bunks on each side. And then all 4 sets of eyes went to this one corner at the head of our bed. And we saw thousands of bugs going up and down the corner, thousands of bugs crawling up and down. That moment was really low. It's hard to describe. We never said anything to each other, but Mother and I felt it was the lowest point in our lives. And we just looked at each other and cried. We just cried and cried. And maybe it was a good thing that we cried and we got it out of our system. Mother said, so be it. Let's get off our ass, and march forward. We were sent to Slocan, a German camp in the Rocks. 22,000 Japanese Canadians were losing freedom in their own country. The situation was, in my mind, really disastrous. I could have walked into a gas oven and would have been totally happy. But then that wasn't going to solve the problem. What does freedom mean to me? The unfortunate thing about freedom is people don't realize the importance until they lose it. Do you ever regain it? Freedom. It pricks you all your life. The treatment by the Canadian government during the war will never leave me. After all these 60, 70 years, I still think about it. That injustice is still there. We're not over it. It should have never happened to 22,000 people and should never happen again to any Canadian. I did feel hatred towards Canada for being so stupid. But I tried to extract the positive aspect of what I learned rather than the negative. So I clung on to my hope. You fight back and try and improve your country, your community. One of the problems I had was we had no private bathhouses. And every time I went to take a bath, I used to be taunted by people who said, look, Ray's disease, don't touch him, pointing to my bad burn and scar. I felt really sad about this, so I decided I would take a bath in Slocan River, which was on the other side of this little mountain. Never told Mother, never told anybody. I didn't want to be caught outside of the camp. So when nobody was coming, I would undress and jump into the river. Yeah, it was absolutely freezing cold. It was like jumping into an iceberg. But that was better than the hot tears. If I was caught, I could have been arrested and maybe in prison, just like my father. And I didn't want Mother to be left alone. So I started to erect a platform so I could watch if anybody were coming and start to build a treehouse. I was able to get some wood from a sawmill, and the rest of it was natural material collected from the area. This treehouse was my first sort of adventure into architecture. I thought it was a masterpiece at the time. It felt like God's will that I built this. And it was a moment that changed my life. that treehouse was essential to see the world of possibilities. It was a place of learning, a place to go quietly and think, to contemplate, to observe nature, and it was really my university. I started to see the beauty of the surrounding, the woods, the mountain. I think it was necessary to save myself. It got me out of despair and hate, and got me out of the gas chamber. And I thought, well, maybe I could do something quite positive. Maybe as an architect, I might be able to contribute. And that gave me a flicker of hope for the future. But then I wasn't too sure what that was going to be.
This is the portrait of a friendly city. A typical city in the Dominion of Canada. A city wrought out of primitive wilderness by men of vision, faith, and courage.
We were the second Japanese-Canadian family to move into Hamilton. The family had been split for nearly 2 years. And when we were reunited in 1945, it wasn't the most pleasant time. There was a lot of discrimination. We were strange to most Hamiltonians, which was expected. I could see my father really struggling. Before he was arrested, my father was a teacher and was now working in a restaurant as a dishwasher. My mother went to work as a housekeeper, scrubbing floors. There wasn't much to look forward to in the future. I told Mother life is not worth it. Those were, so hard moments. In 1945, I became the first Japanese Canadian to go to high school in Hamilton. I guess I was lucky. I was never bullied. And I remember one classmate saying to me, I was taught to believe that all Japanese were short, yellow skin, slant eye, buck teeth, with glasses. What happened to you? He said, well, it must be the Canadian food. Well, I had this wonderful teacher, Herbie Inman, the first day of school. He said to the class, Raymond Moriyama is a new classmate. He's a Japanese Canadian, but he's a Canadian first. He said, if you guys want to get to him, you have to come through me. And this small, pudgy man, he became really tall for me. Then I got good marks, so they couldn't ignore me. At the high school graduation, my father did one remarkable thing. My classmates were getting all kinds of material things. Several received bicycles. One received a car. At the graduation, my dad couldn't afford anything. He didn't have any money. But he gave me the envelope. For a moment, I thought, wow, maybe it's a check, so I could go to the university. There was a poem in a beautiful calligraphy. The poem read, into God's temple of eternity, drive a nail of gold. He wasn't asking me to build this temple, not even to design it, but to put one golden nail into God's temple of eternity. It's not easy. The poem sustained and propelled me through university and in my professional life. that was the best thing that he could have done for me. I was accepted into the University of Toronto School of Architecture. University wasn't easy. We were so poor. I had to live on $10 a week. That included room, board, a lot of books. Even in those days, $10 a week was, not very much. When I started university, I didn't know anything about architecture. No knowledge of who the great architects were or any architectural movements. So I'm saying to myself, oh God, I'm gonna fail. The first class we had was the Dean of Design, Dr. Eric Arthur. For me, he was a great mentor. Dr. Arthur thought I was a brilliant student, the best student he ever had, except I was naive, ignorant, and almost stupid. So he was trying to, shape me up. I did have talent in design. After second year, I won a scholarship, and the scholarship came with money. In many ways, I guess architecture gave me a much better basis to think about life. Kind of a push to start thinking about what I could contribute to the country, to the community. When I went to McGill for my master's, I never attended architectural classes. I would learn about things that I felt were important, not only in architecture, but in planning, like philosophy, psychology, sociology, without social consciousness, without psychology of understanding people. What's architecture? I've known my wife, Sachi, for 83 years. We grew up together on the same block. She was 2.5 months old, and I was 2. I guess I was the baby snatcher. And the only time we were separated is during the war, 7 years. In 1958, I was 28. Sachi was 26. We had 2 children, 2 babies, and $392. And I talked to Sachi, and he said, I would like to go off on my own. I've always had this urge to make my own mistakes, just take a risk. It may have been, really a stupid idea to even consider. But my wife said, I think you should do it. To have somebody support me that solidly, it gave me courage. My employer at that time was giving me at most 6 months to survive. After that, it's like, well. So I said, well, would you give me 3 good reasons? He said, Ray, I'll give you 4. So I said, what's the first reason? Well, you're too young. I was 28. So I said, what's the second reason? He said, there's a recession. Well, of course, I didn't know a recession from a hole in the ground. So I said, what's the third reason? You don't have enough capital. So I said, what's the 4th reason? He said, because you're a goddamn jab. Most people will think that I was offended, at that moment. But I thought it's giving me a resolve, a long stick with a very sharp nails stuck on the end to just goad me on. And he was right. It wasn't easy. But, I learned to pick up myself very quickly after you get knocked down, and that was the key. The first invitation I had to go for an interview, the chairman says, we don't give jobs to enemies. And this is 1958, 13 years after the war. Look what you did to our Canadians in Hong Kong. So I thought, well, it's no use really talking to this ignoramus, and it's no use arguing with them. But I said, those soldiers in Hong Kong were Canadians. The Japanese Canadians were victims in Canada. In both cases, victims. And I walked out. You think that is different today? It isn't. Canada is still filled with a lot of ignorant people. And when did you come to Canada? Have they ever said that to you? Well, they still do. And ask me, when did you come? And you speak pretty good English. And so it goes on. Yeah, it bothers me. But, on the other hand, there are really good, understanding people who sees, today and tomorrow very much more clearly. The first assignment was a lucky one. I received a phone call. A man had said, I hear you started a business, and I'm told you're really good. He asked me to do a private 3-hole golf course that could become 9 holes. The client allowed me to do a design that meant something to me, and that really inspired me. I was always interested in integrating architecture with nature and landscaping. From the day I discovered the environment we were incarcerated in, it was a wonderful experience for which we were given our first Massey Medal Award. So that was the beginning. And I knew that I was on the right track to reach a higher standing in the world of architecture, to be respected and climb in stature. As a young architect, I said, well, what can I do to make Canada a better place? My dream was to bring the community together. I really handed to the Japanese Canadian community. They started after the war with absolutely nothing. Everything was gone. How do you regain self-respect? It's not very easy. The Japanese Canadian Cultural Center filled a part of the emptiness that the Japanese Canadians were feeling after the war. A few leaders came together, determined to put the community together again, to have guts to carry out a dream, which was really a difficult situation because there was absolutely no money. So I pushed the community to commit to a mortgage. 70 people signed their lives away, and this is not too much after the war. People had absolutely no money. And if the mortgage wasn't paid on time, the 70 people would have gone under, and the community too. The building was designed absolutely at minimal cost, but we did it immaculately. Architecture is not just a physical building. Architecture is for people to come together And I think the only way you could do this is to not take, but to give. 70 people made a very important contribution to self-respect and to the ancestry the community has. And their sense of social justice and the cultural flowering of Canada.
One sure way of getting people to learn about science is to get them involved. Invite them to play. Using hands and mind to explore the world, which, after all, is what science is all about.
The Ontario Science Centre was a unique situation. We were able to create something that's never been done. It was kind of a pioneer effort, not just designing this place, but with this new idea.
This is a place designed to get the questions started. It's the Ontario Science Centre, a new kind of museum that's more like a playground, a new kind of library of working models and demonstrations, where you won't see any signs calling for quiet.
I received a phone call from the Minister of Public Works. He said, Raymond, we're looking for some young architect with talent and lots of guts, and that's you. He said, it's going to be an institution of international importance. It's going to be the first hands-on interacting museum. Are you interested? I said, no, sir. It sounds like too much responsibility. He said, Ray, I think you should get your ass down here. It's going to affect your life forever. I said, if you put it that way, I can't refuse. It was really a big challenge. It's really tough. We were a very small firm. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. I think there were 4 of us, including the secretary. I was 33. I was the youngest architect to ever be hired by the provincial government, and the first with a strange name. Confucius said, if you hear, you forget. If you see, you remember some. If you touch and do, it becomes part of you. So I started to think about how to do things with hands. In the treehouse, I learned a lot about unstructured learning. First of all, I didn't have any books, and so learning was from observation. So I tend to believe in the philosophy of phenomenology, in a sense of learning something and then building on top of that, learn something else. We were given an open hand to design the concept. Unless you have a big idea, details are not going to solve your problem. So I always spend a long time thinking, what's the essence of this project? What's important at this time of our civilization? And what's important in the future?
We took it as a sort of a challenge to be a professional dum-dum, to act as a sponge, to listen, to analyze. The dialogue led to a tremendous sort of enthusiasm, and we spent many nights until 5 or 6 in the morning discussing the philosophy.
To this day, I don't know how I was able to convince the cabinet to accept the idea. That was totally out of their range of understanding. Today, it'll never happen. At the time, there was this spirit of guts and experimenting. Now, if it's a large corporation, they want safe, safe, safe. They don't want anybody creative. That's too much of a risk. Having said that, it wasn't easy. And any drawings that we did in those days, there is streaks of blood all over.
Computer will fire retro rockets in 3 seconds. 2, 1. Retro fire.
I used to get invited to these international conferences, largely to be made fun of. I don't think they understood what my aims were, you know, what I was attempting to do. I nearly got bashed up, you know, rotten tomatoes and all that stuff. You know, we should bury this stupid idea. You know, they used to say, "Wow, you're crazy." You know, all this hands-on stuff, participation and all that. I said, they do that in carnivals and Disneyland. You know, it's not for a serious museum. It was really a vicious, tough time, and it continued until the day we opened the door. And then everything stopped. The world changed. It's now the norm. There are now 330 science museums following the model of the Ontario Science Centre. It's a struggle, but in the end, it turned out to be a good struggle.
We don't think much about the environments we spend our lives in, but we feel them. Some city spaces make us feel sort of glum and small. Some, like this, are stimulating. Spaces that are meant to have a liberating effect. They're the hallmark of the architect, Raymond Moriyama.
Scarborough Civic Center was in many ways close to my heart. Having lived through the war years, I knew what democracy, true democracy, should be. And City Hall is what's closest to democracy in action.
Well, first of all, in terms of the basic form, it's a circle to represent a coming together. And if you notice the mayor's window, it symbolizes the coming together. But also, I made it very clear that if it's a bad administration, the mayor's window is low enough you could throw a brick right through it.
It was an open concept, almost like a trays of dishes. We took the attitude that the bosses should have no windows, and they go in the back, and all the secretaries stuck to a desk should be in the front area where they have the view.
The mayor of Scarborough, Gus Harris, now rejoices in a Moriyama-designed office, but back when the decisions were being made, he wanted to give the job to a more conventional architect.
And then Moriyama came in. He didn't have nothing. He just stood in the middle of the council chambers. And he said he would like to build a municipal office that was a people's place. And I thought, well, this fellow, he's a dreamer.
For maybe 20, 30 years, I went through a period nobody understood what I was trying to do. I was out of tune. I was following a different drummer that people didn't understand. For some, I guess I became a hero. For others, I was still stupid. Intuition is very important to me. I could trust my feeling maybe more than the logic of it. Logic, for me, doesn't lead you to anything really creative and very human. I tend to hear jazz as I design. I love jazz. And of course, philosophically, jazz is music of freedom. And it's motivating me to raise the standard so that architects worldwide will aspire higher. Well, it is a crazy profession. You know, it's not like a doctor or dentist or funeral director. You know, there's no steady client. It's like a roller coaster, you know. It's up and down, mostly down. But I try to work with honesty and integrity. The greed is conquering too many of us. You know, people end up just doing things for the money. There's more to life than just making money. My life has to mean something.
Raymond Moriyama's chief concern is always for the individual and the particular community he's trying to serve, which is why no two of his projects look alike.
Even today, I'm still searching, examining. I suppose I'm still looking for the comfort of the mind and heart. I used to have this bantering with our pharmacist, and one day he said to me, Ray, when are you going to take a sabbatical? And this is 17 years after I started practice. In virtually worked all that time. So I said, well, you know, my boss would never give me a sabbatical. Nobody goes out at the epitome of a success. And of course the pharmacist said, wow, your boss is stupid. You know, the boss was me. I was fortunate, I had a wonderful wife. She suggested, why don't you go follow in the footsteps of Buddha? I'm not a Buddhist, but that'll take me into areas that not many Westerners go. You know, that'll be India and Nepal. So I said that, yeah, I'll do it. It'll give me a chance to experience another environment and give me a chance to think back about Canada. And so I decided to do this chronologically from birth of Siddhartha to Parinirvana as Buddha. It was a path of discovery. I went on for 3 months and I walked at least 600 miles. My budget was 18 cents Canadian a day. I had to spend most of the time sleeping outside or in dung shack. It didn't offer much luxury. And it was so peaceful. The mountains were like hard-edged paintings. And the stars were almost reachable. Absolutely gorgeous. But boy, it was humbling. You know, completely was an eye-opener of understanding and tolerance. You start to understand what's important in life. I think if most people are asked, what are you? They really don't know. People do not see what is real. They see what other people want you to think. So you're never a true human being. The first thing I realized when I got home, we had so much material things, and spiritually, we have nothing. You know, happiness is giving more than you receive. So, you know, it's still my time to give. The Canadian Embassy in Tokyo was just a real joy. You know, being in Japan, home of my ancestry, it was emotionally very high. Canada had 4 acres of land. The property was bought in, I think it was 1931. It was the second best deal anybody's done next to Manhattan Island. It was bought for, you know, really ridiculous cheap price. because at the time, the Japanese believed that there was a ghost living on the property. And they were very superstitious. They wouldn't buy it. The property faced the imperial Togugosho, the imperial ground. And this Harayamadori was the most prestigious street in Japan. What do you think it was worth in 1988? $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. It was worth something like $4 billion, $4 billion US. So we had this brilliant idea of building this embassy, $200 million worth, at no cost to the Canadian taxpayer. The answer is a treehouse. We piggybacked the embassy on top of a commercial facility. So the fourth floor became the main entrance. And the rent we received wouldn't generate enough money to pay for the whole thing. It was a brilliant solution. One of the most economical embassies Canada ever built. It was fulfilling because I was extending my hand to my ancestors. The family on my mother's side has a cemetery only a block and a half away from the embassy. The interesting thing is when I was a child, after my accident, my bad burn wasn't getting any better. And so my mother and younger sister, three of us went to Japan to go see a doctor to look after my burn. And in Japan, I lived with my grandfather, only 2 subway stops from the embassy. My grandfather was a mining executive, but to me, he was a great, handsome samurai who was an expert on haiku, poem writing, who knew all about nature and about honor. And he used to call me Junichi. That's my Japanese name. One evening he called me, come out here. So I ran out and he said, look at the moon. And here's this full moon. What do you see? It's round. Is it beautiful? Yeah, it's beautiful. 2 nights later, he said, Junichi, come up. Look at the moon again. And we're looking at this sky and saying, it's not round anymore. And Grandfather said, that's right. He then asked me a very important question. He said, which is more beautiful, this imperfect moon or the perfect moon you saw the other day? Before I could answer, he said, Junichi, don't you think this imperfection is more beautiful than perfection? A man is not perfect. There is magic to imperfection. And that I remember forever.
This Lifetime Achievement Award goes to a man who has made an extraordinary contribution to the world of architecture, both in Canada and abroad, Raymond Moriyama.
Boy, this is an overwhelming honor.
Ray Moriyama's citation speaks of his buildings as much-loved public places, combining soaring architectural aesthetics with practicality, familiarity, and attention to human scale. I am honored to present this Lifetime Achievement Award to Ray Moriarty.
I would like to congratulate the architect. It seems to be a very good building. I'm very jealous of you. Because I wanted to be an architect, but my father did not want me to be an architect. I don't know if it was right or wrong, but when I see you, I don't know. A good one.
Architecture plays quite a big role in the Canadian War Museum. The intention here was to remember and honor Canadians and others who served Canada during the war. And on the other hand, looking for hope, still unfulfilled. Before we started, I insisted that as part of our research, we talk to Canadians across Canada and listen to their opinion, thoughts, inspiration about war or anti-war sentiment. And the input that we receive is part of the project now. The first day on the job, I said that this place is not going to be beautiful in a conventional sense. It was meant to disturb people and bother them, to represent the war-torn situation. I want perfect imperfection. The first sketch I made was a sketch of a sound. It was not a physical thing, but the sound of that breeze blowing through the treehouse. The sound of my childhood. I wanted people to feel the wartime experience. And it was amazing that, 60 years later, a young child's thought would emerge and give me inspiration to do this place. Architecture itself had to contribute to the message, not just be a container that holds the museum inside. So I sloped the floor down a little bit and slope it up, and the ceilings are undulating and the walls are tilting, giving people a sense of unrest, to basically challenge the people and to make them rethink, like, where do you stand? Memorial Hall, we have the original tombstone of the unknown soldier. And on Remembrance Day, now one day Canadians come together in silence. On November 11th, exactly at 11 o'clock, what I call 11-11-11. When the sun is out, sunlight will penetrate through the building and frame the tombstone, the unknown soldier, completely. Going to war is like going to the depths of hell to resurrect the soul. what I want is to think about peace, about humanity, and think about the future. Architecture is about life. Man should be measured by doing deeds that will elevate human life in the profession towards a better Canada and a better world. You know, it's a marvelous, diverse world where everything is possible. And that's what I'm fighting for, to make a change. I must instill the idea of using architecture to express a potential hope for all of us. It's part of my job, I think.